Yes. Director Cody.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Zimmer.
Here.
Chair Hilsky. All accounted for.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome to the May 18th meeting of the Los Osos Groundwater Basin Management Committee. We've gone through the first three items on our agenda. Next item on the agenda is board member comments. If anybody has any comments, status updates, or communications they'd like to do with other directors, staff, or public regarding non-agenda items, now's your opportunity. Okay, seeing none. Special presentation number 5, none of that. Sorry. Okay, we'll move then to the consent agenda, which is item number 6. There's 2 items on the consent agenda, number 6A, which is the 2022 budget update and invoice register. And the second item is 6B, approval of the minutes from April 20th, 2022 BMC meeting. Does anybody have any questions or comments or want to pull one of these items for separate consideration? Okay, can we go to public comment, please?
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're online, please raise your hand. And if you're in person, please come up to the podium. We have 2 public comments online.
Okay,
Patrick McGibney.
Yeah, is this for things not on the agenda?
yes, it is, Patrick.
Oh, thank you. You should please state that next time.
Oh, no, pardon
Okay.
me, excuse me, but we're past that. We're on the consent agenda, Patrick.
All right, I'll wait. Thank you.
All right, then the other person has lowered their hand.
Okay. So we'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee. Do we have any further discussion or just take a vote? If we're going to take a vote, I need a motion and a second.
I'll move that we accept the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a first and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. Daniel, could you take a roll call vote, please?
Director Cody.
Yes.
Director Gibson.
Yes.
Director Zimmer.
Yes.
Chair Hilsky.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, now we're to item 7. I'm sorry. Public comments on items not appearing on the agenda. So this is where members of the public can make comments for items not on the agenda, but they must be within the jurisdiction of the Basin Management Committee. So not on the agenda, but within our jurisdiction. So we'll open public comment on those particular items. You will be limited to 3 minutes.
If you're online, please raise your hand. And if you're in person, please come up to the podium. We have 3 public comments online, and I'll go in order as they're appearing here. First is Lisa D. Please unmute yourself, Lisa.
Yes, good afternoon. I just wanted to make a comment. I attended a meeting, I think it was either the previous or the one before that, and there was mention of Sigma. And it really didn't sound as though that was really heard as an item that might be worth discussing for its pros and cons. And the little bit that I know, it sounds like there are potential benefits of falling under Sigma. You gain more resources. There's the potential of metering ag, and there's greater funding resources. So I'd really like to see it on the agenda at some point soon. It sounds like it would take a few years to get connected into Sigma, but a few years flies by quick. It might be worth it for our groundwater basin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Jeff Edwards. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Edwards. I wanted to go over or reiterate a request I've made before, and that is to develop a comprehensive database for all the wells overlying the basin. And as you probably know, the health department has an extensive database. It's likely Cleith Harris Group has a database. And so, I mean, this seems to be central to basin management, and it's provided for in the basin plan, yet we really haven't organized that. It would seem to me to be a priority to know where all the wells are, all the straws are in the basin or overlying the basin. A related program that I've also discussed is the well abandonment program. And I think basin management's a lot easier with the fewer straws in the basin. And it would be, it's expensive to abandon wells typically, and a funding mechanism to create a funding mechanism to assist people that want to abandon wells, I think is important. We also know that not only do the wells and their presence potentially affect basin management quantitatively, but also qualitatively. Borehole leakage is a threat to water quality. And we have various strata in our basin, so leakage from one basin to the other may not be a good thing. Coincidentally, speaking of wells, there now appears to be some, based on the Coastal Commission letters and a lot of the rhetoric we hear inside the community, property owners are now beginning to scramble to get new wells and get new wells permitted in overlying our basin, especially in the agricultural sector. So this is a classic case where we've spooked people. They have significant investments in real estate and their properties, and we're inducing behavior that's contrary to our own basin management goals. These are unintended consequences of, again, the rhetoric and the false narrative about the condition of our groundwater basin that we hear from the Coastal Commission and others, unfortunately. And we'll talk later about the Coastal Commission. So some of these new wells that are being contemplated, some are going to be metered and some won't be. So again, complicating basin management. In closing, please consider establishing comprehensive database for all the wells overlying the basin and implement a basin abandonment program, a well abandonment program. And again, I'm not sure what you can do about induced behavior, but these scare tactics are similar to the early 1990s when we talked about growth management in our county. And some of you know what happened there. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, next is Patrick McGibney. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Patrick McGibney. I am with the Sustainability Group. Last month, I addressed the option of having Sigma as the managing tool for creating a sustainable water basin for a community. I've spoken to 3 of you who are sitting right here today, who are on this committee or intimately connected to it, and you supported going under Sigma. Just recently in phase 1, the state awarded $150 million to various basins of medium and high concern to help managing those basins. In phase 2, there will be $200 million available, all for Sigma basins. It's been acknowledged that our basin needs more monitoring wells, and that will give hard data, but we don't have the money for them. So we continue to rely on modeling, which is only as good as the numbers given. Our problem, your problem, is that the numbers, the metrics used are for best case scenarios and don't represent the worst case reality we're in. Spencer Harris tells us the maximum sustainable yield is the sustainable yield of the basin after implementing all of the basin plan infrastructure projects, both existing and potential. That modeling approach I disagree with, as does the Coastal Commission. It was used in 2016 and 17 when the estimated safe yield was increased from 2450 to 2760, based on the projection of programs A and C being completed, neither of which have been to this day. Before the Coastal Commission will allow further building, which seems to be the goal of the BMC, it will require conclusive evidence that the basin is sustainable for at least the current population. Conclusive evidence, in their view, is not based on projections, hypotheticals, or best case scenarios. They will want to see hard evidence, real data, not modeling estimates. That's why we need more monitoring wells and a realistic metrics for the modeling being used. We do not get an average of 17.3 inches of rain on an annual basis. We will not be getting 800 acre feet of stream flow. In last season's rainfall, 2021, my house on 3rd Street received 10.74 inches, not 17.3, and surely not the 23 inches as claimed in the 2021 calendar year in the AMR. We're in a mega drought. Inflating numbers is disingenuous and downright dangerous, but without being under Sigma, there is no oversight. It isn't losing your control over the basin if under Sigma that you're worried about. It's having to be accountable, having to work together to actually save our basin from further overdraft and ruination. If those were a real concern of yours, we'd move towards Sigma, or at least allow it on the agenda so we could all discuss it. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Patrick.
I'm sorry.
Do you have another one
Yeah, we
online?
do online.
Take the online.
Okay. We have Becky McFarland online. Just unmute. You should be unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm glad to be here this afternoon on this beautiful day, Becky McFarland. And I agree about Sigma. It sounds like a good thing if grants can be gotten through that to help implement things that the Basin Management Committee wants to implement. That should happen. And I agree that all wells should be metered on our aquifer. We don't know exactly what's going on. One last thing, well, actually, this is a question, but it may come up later. I'm just wondering, how far back does the seawater intrusion plume need to be pushed back before our aquifer is considered sustainable? When you look back to where the line was back in 2005, or even was 1985, it was at the sand spit. I mean, when do we say that more pumping isn't going to actually bring more in? And it's not sustainable until that seawater is pushed out. I'm just wondering what you or whoever considers is far enough. Also, I'd like to recommend that there be a BMC report for regular people, so people in the community can read this and understand what all of this means to them. It can be very hard to understand. So I think that would be a good way to spend some money for this community, for their sole source of water. We all depend on this. Also, I want to state again, I am not against people getting to build on their lots. They've been waiting a long, long time. Some people are jumping the line through interesting means. I don't think that's fair. But I'd like to see people to be able to build their dream homes. My parents were allowed to do that in 1989, just as the moratorium hit. But yeah, let's take care of the aquifer, but let's not do building until we know that our water supply is sustainable. Thank you, and thank you for serving on this committee.
Thank you. Is that all we have online?
Yes, we have one at the podium though.
Good afternoon, Lindy Owen, local Los Osos. That's okay. You're doing fine.
You win the jackpot prize.
Okay, Lindy Owen again. I'm going to pose the question because I've been asking for 7 or 8 years. What is holding off getting metering on private wells? If 50% of the water in our basin is coming out of those wells, and you can only guesstimate how much that is, what is it going to take to, I know California water laws are complex but they're being changed constantly because California is in a horrible situation with their water basins and supply. So I want to know why we can't meter ag wells for volume. And the other question I have, if 50% of our water is being used by ag, what happened with the ag exchange and possible blending to give the water that is recycled is not acceptable by those farmers. But if it were blended, it could possibly meet the need. And if they used 25% of their water, drinking water, and were able to blend it with 25% of recycled water, please explain why that has not been looked at or done to this date. I had one other. I think, well, those are my 2 concerns. If we want to see growth in this community, we need to maintain the basin. And if we can save 50% of our water or have a little bit of control, it is a known fact that when an ag well is metered, there's a 10 to 15% drop of usage, only because they become aware. It is also a big opportunity to have them be part of what is going on with our basin. They are not exactly different from us. So I really want to know what those answers are. And if we could lower the price for the recycled water, would that not be cheaper than putting in wells and attempts to keep seawater intrusion away? I think it would. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. Any other public comment?
No.
Okay, we'll close public comment on items not appearing on the agenda. Daniel, would you like to answer some of those questions? I know Bruce, you'll like to answer Lindy's questions.
I'd be happy to.
Well,
I'd
let's
be
let
happy to
Daniel
at your
go.
pleasure.
Yeah, let's go Daniel down the road. I just wanted to.
So yeah, a number of good public comment provided. There was a question about Sigma consideration. There are pros and cons associated with the different jurisdictions that currently the basin currently falls under court's jurisdiction as an adjudicated basin. Subsequent to the adjudication, Sigma was passed, which does provide certain funding mechanisms, but also does come with additional requirements. And also there are certain participation limitations that Sigma has in terms of PUC regulated water companies can't participate in the GSA. So there are a number of different considerations, pros and cons when considering Sigma. And so not something that I think should be done blindly, would need extensive consideration before charting a path. With respect to the comment about the comprehensive well database and well abandonment, I think that's a good comment. That's something that I'll work with staff to see, how comprehensive the records that we have are with respect to the number of wells and their status within the basin, and then potentially incorporate or comparing those to county health and or DWR well records.
The part of that question was, we need to know where all the current wells are located. So I think you have that data, but it's a good question because if they're pumping out of various areas of the basin, it would be helpful to identify those areas.
Yeah, so yeah, it would be good to check with Cleith Harris geologists who on how extensive their records are and how that's reflected in the modeling. There was a comment about maximum sustainable yield, and I think it's important to add a point of clarification. There are really two sustainable yield concepts that we have as specified in the basin plan. One is the sustainable yield estimate for the current year. So currently the Basin Management Committee has established a sustainable yield estimate for calendar year 2022. That is a number that reflects the currently available infrastructure as well as the other constraints that the BMC incorporated into that calculation. The maximum sustainable yield is the theoretical calculation of the sustainable yield that would be available through the implementation of all of the remaining basin plan programs. And that is a factor in the basin development metric. And so I just want to make sure we differentiate that. What we have been talking about mostly in the last number of meetings is the current sustainable yield or the sustainable yield estimate for calendar year 2022. But there is separately a maximum sustainable yield estimate that factors in and is a different number. I think there was a comment about inflated numbers. I just want to reiterate that specifically with reflect to rainfall, we are using the best available data that we have with respect to rainfall. We're not projecting one way or another. We're basing our analyses and decisions off the rainfall data that we have at hand. And so I don't understand where the term inflated comes in. We'll cover this later in more detail, but the value of 23 inches in the Appendix H of the annual report is just a factor of rainfall patterns, but is a valid number from the Los Osos rainfall gauge. Sigma metering.
Yeah, I'd like Bruce to talk about the metering and the exchanges with the blended water.
Okay, then the last
those are
one,
both under his authority, the county's authority, not ours.
how far back does seawater need to be pushed back to achieve sustainability? So I guess my comment on that is the BMC recently established its criteria for calculating the sustainable yield of the basin, and that criteria was to halt seawater intrusion at its current extent and not allow it to get any worse than it is now. So in a lot of ways, I think that's how the BMC has defined calculation of the sustainable yield.
Okay, yeah, so Bruce, if it's okay with you, we've talked about monitoring the wells before, but that's something that's not in our authority. It's within the county's authority because you guys are the land use planners, and wastewater treatment plant is also under your authority. So if you could discuss those two questions, I'd appreciate it.
Well, sure. Going to the latter one, the wastewater treatment plant is operated by the county, owned and operated by the county and paid for by the ratepayers in the prohibition zone. The question of blending to me is really one of is it a project that the BMC wants to pursue? And in looking at a couple of the issues that were raised there, these are things that the BMC has looked at over the years. And in the last prioritization, the question of metering was given a very low priority. I can talk a little bit more about that in a second. The matter of ag exchange, it's not, I don't know that it's necessarily established that the Title 23 water coming out of the treatment plant is de facto unacceptable to ag interests. I don't know that that's been particularly tested very highly. If it does need to be blended, it needs to be blended. But that's, again, that I don't see as a particular county issue. The question of ag exchange was to replace some of the draw that ag is using out there with recycled water. And the exchange part of that would be then to get that freed up water, if you will, put into the water purveyors system. But that is, and I believe that that's a consideration under Program D, if I remember correctly, a means by which to expand the overall water supply for
potential new development. That whether we pursue ag exchange with or without blending is really a matter of the question of the BMC elevating it to a project that they believe is timely. And again, that the last we discussed that was down the road. As to metering wells, any new well that's drilled in the coastal zone is required to have a meter. And can't remember the exact requirements. I believe it's in Title 8 that may require some reporting of that occasionally or perhaps annually to the Environmental Health Department. The question of whether the BMC wants to pursue metering of the wells outside the purveyor's jurisdiction is again one that we can talk about. We've talked about how shall I say, superficially, or at least in general. But I think you're correct, Mr. Chairman, that the actual passage of an ordinance is a county land use issue. Whether we want to do it, I think really has to depend on an in-depth discussion by the BMC. And there are a couple of things there. Metering wells is going to be a controversial issue, is going to require a long discussion. And in that discussion, those wells that are not in the purveyor's jurisdictions are still within the adjudicated area, but those individual well owners are not party to the adjudication. So in pursuing metering, it could very well be that those individual parties might want to be in the adjudication, might have to be in the adjudication. And that raises a level of complexity that I think the BMC as a group, and particularly the purveyors as individual entities, need to think very carefully about, not to mention the question of what exactly is that information going to be used for? How exactly is the information from metering going to be used to improve basin management? So all these things are possibilities. We have them in the plans. Whether we pursue each or any of them is a matter that's going to require some thought and conversation. I hope that answers questions that were on your mind.
Thank you, Bruce. I thought that was a very, very good discussion. So I think that was.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I have one other thing I wanted to add.
Okay, go ahead.
As Mr. Heimel was talking about sustainable yield versus maximum sustainable yield, I think there's a slight change in terminology might be helpful. Instead of maximum sustainable yield, we might want to go to potential sustainable yield or planned sustainable yield to indicate that a sustainable yield larger than the one we're using in any given calendar year does depend on projects that are in the basin management plan. So potential planned sustainable yield or something like that might be a useful piece of terminology to distinguish it from the current management objective.
Right. Okay, thank you. Any other directors have a comment? Yep, Charlie.
I have a question for Bruce Gibson about what you just said, that the private well owners are not a party to the adjudication. And that's interesting. And at one point during one of these meetings, you mentioned that actually the county representative on the adjudication, the member of this board, does represent private well owners. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you still believe that, or if that was, if I misunderstood something.
Yeah. Well, I'd leave it to the legal experts to decide what the level, what the extent and scope of that representation is.
Fair enough.
All the individual well owners were offered the opportunity to join the adjudication as they had to be, but the decision, which I think was the correct one as we entered this, was that they not be parties to the adjudication. It saves them time and money, and it did not seem to be crucial to developing the basin management plan to have them as parties. So it simplified the work of adjudication, the work of this basin management committee.
Thank you for that
And-
clarification.
And
That
so
was
we'll see,
important.
yeah. See where we're
Dan,
going.
I have a question for you. You mentioned a moment ago as you're answering questions that the BMC recently agreed that halting the seawater front at its current extent was sufficient for achieving sustainability. I do remember a conversation like that held during a meeting here last year where, and myself as the S&T representative protested probably a little too loudly about that and a little bit too, what would you say, emotionally about that. But leaving the seawater front at its current extent completely inundates S&T Mutual Water Service area with seawater. So I remember I protested that. I don't believe that that policy was ever adopted by a unanimous vote of the board. Do you agree with that?
Let me clarify some things there. I think it might be helpful. One, I should say, so the criteria that was utilized to calculate the sustainable yield was the basin. One of those criteria that was actually changed in the updated calculation was to limit the seawater intrusion at its current extent. Previous calculations had actually allowed the seawater intrusion front to intrude further than its current extent, but not impact active pumping wells. And so that was the change that was made in the recent update to the sustainable yield estimate. And that methodology and the number associated with that was unanimously approved by the Basin Management Committee.
If that is the case, then that was a mistaken vote on my part.
Well-
S&T would never agree to that.
But that's the other point of clarification I want to make. That calculates the sustainable yield, 2,380. However, when we are calculating our target production or pumping from the basin for the purposes of the basin yield metric, we apply a 20% buffer for uncertainty and a desire to push the seawater intrusion back further than its current extent. So the desire to push it back gets incorporated as part of the 20% reduction from the sustainable yield that we use for the basin yield metric.
Thank you for that discussion.
Okay, thank you. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, but if I might just add one point of clarification in thinking about Charlie's question, I think I can speak more clearly to the representation issue. The county is a party to the adjudication because of one well that we operate at the community park. We do not represent the water use interests of the individual well owners. They would be completely separate parties. To the extent that the county represents their interests, I am a county supervisor, and it is an unincorporated part of the county. So in terms of land use issues, I have my share of authority and responsibility for managing land use in there. But in terms of water, we do not represent their interests.
okay, thank you. All right, so with that, then we'll move on to item number 8, which is the executive director's report. Daniel, would you like to move us into that item, please?
Thank you, Marshall. Yes, pleased to present the executive director's report for the month of May. So I will move through the report. We don't have a couple of additions since our last meeting in April, but a couple of key items that I wanted to cover in my report. Starting off with funding and financing, I wanted to discuss the Sustainable Groundwater Management Implementation Grant. This is a grant opportunity that's currently available. The round 1 of this grant was mentioned earlier in the dialogue in the meeting. This is the second round of this grant, and the eligibility for this grant is opened up. The original or the first round was only available for critically overdraft basins. The second round is available for entities in medium and high and critically overdraft priority basins. Interestingly, even though this is a Sigma grant, agencies that fall within basins that adjudicated after January 1st of 2015 are eligible for funding within this grant opportunity. So while it is a Sigma grant, they are opening the door for adjudicated basins. However, unfortunately, one of the other funding eligibility criteria, as I mentioned before, is for agencies that are in medium, high, or critically overdraft basins. The Los Osos Basin is currently prioritized as very low, primarily because it is adjudicated. So while there on paper isn't an opportunity to be eligible for this grant, it may be worth considering following up with DWR and or lobbying for eligibility for the Los Osos Basin, given its eligibility to certain criteria, but not others. So something for the BMC to consider. And the applications for this grant aren't anticipated to be due till this fall. So we would have time to potentially reach out to DWR with a request of that nature. Next grant opportunity is the IRWM grant. Round 2 of the Prop 1-2 IRWM implementation grant cycle is currently underway. The local call for projects opened in April and closed in April. The BMC didn't submit any projects for that grant opportunity, primarily because that grant is focused on implementation or shovel-ready projects. The BMC didn't necessarily have any projects that fit that criteria at this time. And then the final grant discussion is the Water Recycling Funding Program grant that we've talked about at numerous meetings here. We're still in the process of having the Los Osos Community Services District application reviewed by the Division of Financial Assistance, and hopefully anticipating word around approval of that grant application here soon. I wanted to provide an update on the funding study. The BMC staff continues to work with the funding consultant to review the draft report on the funding options. We are hoping to bring that to the BMC as soon as possible. Unfortunately, we've had to defer that because of efforts associated with getting the annual report reviewed and published in time for the court deadlines. But that initiative is still underway and will come to the BMC for their consideration. And it's just, as those of you that have reviewed the TOSIG report when this was looked at previously, it's complicated, especially when you've got 4 different agency types in the BMC. You know, we have a community services district, a mutual water company, a PUC regulated utility, and a county organization. And so what powers and authorities each of those different organizational types would have with respect to the different funding opportunities and or within JPA takes a lot of work to get it right. And we want to make sure we get it right before we bring it to the BMC for their consideration. Update on BMC legal counsel. At the last BMC meeting, the BMC authorized an RFP for dedicated BMC legal counsel. That RFP has been released, and the BMC staff is soliciting statements of qualifications from legal counsel, and those will be reviewed at the BMC staff and brought forth to the BMC at a future meeting. There's an update on the Title 19 water offset study, or the BMC staff continues to meet with county planning on a monthly basis to coordinate on this study and a number of other initiatives. At our last meeting, we received an update from county planning that study is progressing, but that the schedule has been extended by a couple of months. again, with the intent of providing the consultant with the sufficient time needed to really review all the data in detail and do their due diligence to support bringing forth quality findings and recommendations with respect to water offsets within the community. And then a couple of upcoming Board of Supervisors items with respect to land use or development on, well, I guess that occurred yesterday.
That was yesterday,
Yes,
yes.
so Bruce could probably give us an update on the ADU ordinance.
This is, yeah, the ADU ordinance. Yeah.
ADU ordinance was actually continued to August 9th of this year, so that our staff can pursue discussions with Coastal that wrap into the item that you're going to be discussing in a little bit.
And
Thank
then
you,
on
Bruce. Sorry, we blindsided you on that.
Never blind.
On June 7th, the Board of Supervisors, I presumably will be taking the vacation rental ordinance, which is, it requires signage relative to water conservation in vacation rentals. And that concludes, oh, no, I did want to provide a couple of updates on the status of basin plan programs. With respect to program A, I believe we've had some promising developments with the upper 8th Street well. We were, the CSD was stuck in some supply chain delays, but has come up with a strategy, I believe, to be able to get the electronics and controls equipment needed to complete that program. And hopefully we'll have the upper 8th Street well operational this month. And then with respect to program C, the original bidding of the second program C well by the Community Services District only received one bid that was over the engineer's estimate of the project budget. That project was rebid and received 2 bids, and I believe those bids are currently under review. And so hopefully that'll be moving forward as well. And then finally, wanted to report that between this and our last meeting, as we talked about, I did have the opportunity to participate along with 3 of the water purveyors, or all the water purveyors and county representatives in the Los Osos Community Advisory Committee outreach event on May 1st at the Red Barn. I had an opportunity to provide a presentation on the roles of the BMC and to present findings from the draft 2021 BMC annual report, and hopefully share a lot of good information with the community about the BMC, about the current monitoring data, and then really provide information on opportunities for them to better engage in water issues in Los Osos through participation in BMC meetings. That concludes my report.
Any questions for Daniel from the committee members?
I'll just say Dan did an outstanding job presenting the BMC to the community. I caught virtually all of it, and it was dense with information, but really well organized and very well received, and appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, Mark.
I have a question regarding the funding and finance programs and the designation of the Los Osos Basin as a low priority basin. What I saw on DWR, they have a map on there, and it's still designated as a critically overdrafted basin on that map. So can you help me understand, is that just needs to be updated on DWR's website, or how does this, you mentioned component C and then gave an example of it, but I wasn't able to tie those two together. So I just don't understand why DWR is posting it as critically overdraft, and then we're saying that it's a low priority here.
I can help. I think probably some further clarification and outreach would be warranted, but my understanding is that that the Los Osos Basin is prioritized as a very low priority basin based on the criteria in 8C. However, it still is characterized as having conditions of being critically overdrafted, but that I believe is separate than its prioritization. And we've reached out to DWR, and their initial response was, as I described, that it's Los Osos is classified as very low priority and therefore is not eligible for this funding round. But I think some additional follow-up to better understand, how we can be both.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you reached out to them and had that clarity, I didn't know if you were just reading something and documented it that way, or if you've actually had a discussion on it. But if you've reached out to them, that's fine.
Yeah, we do have an email response from
Okay.
DWR.
Well, I think additional follow-up at this point would be helpful. You can say the question was raised at the Basin Management Committee.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, particularly if I could, Mr. Chairman, the medium, high and critically overdrafted are all designations under Sigma, of which we are exempted. And so it may be simply how should we say, a certain casualness at DWR in how they characterize our basin. At the same time, the functional intent of that grant program in terms of managing groundwater in a particularly important part of California, we may fulfill the intent of what they're trying to do. So I think it's definitely worth pressing them a little bit on.
Yeah, this is Charlie. I agree that reaching out and asking the question directly. I did some research on this last year. The two designations are separate and they're not commingled. The designation as a basin in severe overdraft is not related to the priority. The priority designation is relative to some complicated scoring about how many points are allocated based on the geographical and other issues with the basin. And I can send Dan my work, but probably better to have an explanation from the state actually. But they're two separate designations,
Okay.
not related to each other. And they continue to designate basins, even adjudicated basins, as either their overdraft state or their priority, regardless of whether they're adjudicated or members of SGMA, GSA.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was helpful. Do you have something else, Mark?
Yeah, I have one more question or more a comment just on the BMC initiatives and the lower aquifer monitoring. One of the key components is our Cleith Harris and his work to recommend modifying the data and the wells and the improvements that we need to make. I'd just like to emphasize, I know he's been working on the annual report and things like that, but one of the thoughts is that we would be moving through this project and preparing when we start preparing our budgets for 2023, we would either include some money for planning or some environmental review or something for an additional monitoring point. I think that's just very important to have that accurate data coming from direct analysis of the water. So just making a comment that I'd like him to put priority on that project maybe.
Yeah, no, that's a good comment. Yeah, and we're emphasizing that. And the current goal is to be able to at least do one lower aquifer well modification this calendar year.
Yeah.
And then ideally find a way to budget a new well in the next calendar year. So we'll strive to try to hit those timelines.
Yeah, and that's what I am also thinking. And I'm just worried that we're going to all of a sudden start developing our budget and then we're not going to have things in place to actually put that for 2023 in our budget.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? Excuse me, before we go to public comment. Okay, let's go to public comment, please.
If you'd like to make a comment online, please raise your hand or come up to the podium in person. We have 2 online. 3, hang on. All right, Jeff Edwards, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I have several comments on the ED report. But first of all, I wanted to perhaps elucidate your recent conversation on the basin designations. And it's my understanding that the mere presence of seawater intrusion is what triggers the overdraft designation at the state level. So whatever that's worth. With regard to the ED report, I continue to have concerns about the SCI consulting group work relative to BMC funding and organizational structures. Apparently, a draft report has been out for over a month, and yet the public has not seen it. I object to that. It's time to release the SCI work. Again, I have concerns about it largely because the whole idea about organizational structure is to generate funding and so forth, and it's overkill. We don't need a lot of money to finalize the basin plan projects. Let's keep this simple. We're contemplating these reports or studies, and it's just not necessary. It's not that complicated, in spite of the fact that the different purveyors have different legal statuses. So let's release the report. I don't know why it's not out. Let the public review it. Let the public comment. It may help your decision-making process. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday regarding ADUs in the coastal zone. I provided a letter to the board, and I also testified yesterday. And the simple fact is the California Coastal Commission does not have regulatory authority over water resources in Los Osos. And this is evidenced by their attempt to shoehorn in jurisdiction by claiming adverse impacts to wetlands and marshes and riparian areas. It's a bluff. They don't have jurisdiction. So as I urged the board yesterday, reject the modifications. It's an all or nothing deal. Reject the modifications, and that will not change how the county, appreciably change how the county administers state law relative to ADUs. Lastly, I'd like to express my disappointment with this continued effort towards the transient model. I support the transient model. However, the county should be funding this, or at least absorbing the staff time instead of the LOCSD. And I don't know why the county continues to shirk their responsibilities. They need to step up and contribute appropriately, as they do to other GSPs. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Hello, my name is Lynette Tornatsky, and I was just wondering if the Title 19 update would be ready for the Coastal Commission when our community plan is presented to them sometime, maybe at the end of this summer, who knows exactly. Just wondering if that Title 19 update would be done by then. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynette.
Next is Patrick McGibney.
Thank you, Patrick McGibney. And I think I'll throw my 2 cents in about the Sigma designation and why we are low priority. I was told by DWR that because we are an adjudicated basin and have a basin plan and a BMC, they are not concerned about our basin any longer. We are supposed to be taking care of that, though we are in extreme overdraft. The director's report states that the sustainable yield for 2021 and prior years was estimated using a basin model as the maximum amount of water that may be extracted from the basin with no further inland advance of the front. And that's incorrect, because in prior years, the sustainable yield has always allowed the front to move inland. In the stipulated judgment, it states, for the purpose of adjudication of a groundwater basin, safe yield is defined as the maximum quantity of water which can be withdrawn annually from a groundwater supply, causing no undesirable results. And an undesirable result, it says, is seawater intrusion, meaning if there is seawater intrusion, we do not have a safe yield and the basin is in overdraft. In the director's report dealing with Sigma, it says Los Osos area subbasin is listed as very low priority for Sigma and in critical conditions of overdraft. It then says in small print, a basin is subject to critical conditions of overdraft when continuation of present water management practices would probably result in significant adverse overdraft related impacts. I thought that was very interesting. A discussion of Sigma should be on the agenda, as we have talked about. And after listening to the official notes, it was requested to be on. According to your rules and regulations on section 8.5.2, a request from a director is all it takes to have something put on the agenda. There is nothing about taking a vote, which was done, and it was decided not to be put on the agenda. That not only deprived the directors from discussion, but also the community. This isn't your private fiefdom. You're not ruling over it. It's our only water supply, and we have the right to be in all discussions regarding its management and sustainability. And we would like to talk about Sigma. Please put it on the agenda. Thank you.
All right, we have one more public comment.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right, Becky McFarland, please unmute yourself.
Hello again. Still glad to be here. In regards to the draft BMC report being out, I don't know if the former speakers thought the report isn't out to the public at all, but it is up on the CSD website and has been posted on Nextdoor and other places on Facebook. And excuse me if I'm not getting in the right comment section, but the comment about ag users, I think Mr. Gibson had said, they're not sure why people aren't using it. Ag users that I know and have spoken to say they don't want the water because of the salts in the water and the cost. Another one complained that a big giant pipe was put in at cost to everyone to water 2 lawns out on, is it Blue Heron Lane? And then also in regards to the ADUs and the Coastal Commission, we really shouldn't even have to have the Coastal Commission get involved here. The county should be able to look at these basin management reports. They should listen to Charlie Cody from S&T Water, who has more seawater chlorides in their wells and rising nitrates, to understand there's a problem with the water here. Building has been going on all throughout the moratorium. I can drive around and point out tons of houses that have been built here and guest houses that have been put in on my own street when the county knows we have water problems here. And the county knows that a 3-story building with a little house on top that is a replacement for a 156 square foot house is going to use more water than that little shack of a house. There's been a number of little shack houses replaced with full-on houses. So yeah, it's too bad the Coastal Commission has to waste their time and money, and citizens have to waste their time and money getting the county to realize that what these reports are saying. Yes, it's our only water supply. You have a responsibility to us, people that are paying for the water. We're paying for the recycling plant. You need to protect our water, county. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is that the last one online?
We have a new one online.
Okay.
And then,
Well, I know we have in
Okay.
person. I didn't know if we had more online. I can't see that.
all right, LOGG, please unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Emily Miggins. Just want to say, after a lifetime career of working on sustainability metrics and reporting standards in big business, small business, et cetera, and working with agricultural growers, I would think that the county and our own CSD could perhaps pull in, academic resources at Cal Poly and even look at funding opportunities from large corporate ag entities. There's a lot of money out there to work with applied water use metrics on crops. Because if 50% of our water usage is ag, there's great opportunity there to reduce the actual applied water to crops. That's all I wanted to say. It makes total sense. And it's a little bit surprising that the salad bowl of California isn't doing this on a voluntary basis. I think it would be a great move, and I know at least with Mark Zimmer and Golden State, there's a lot of different research going on at the PUC with these type of metrics. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else online too?
No.
All right. Lindy?
Hi again, Lindy Owen. I was really disturbed to hear that, if I understood it right, DWR considers our basin, because we're being adjudicated, a low priority. A low priority to who? Maybe to the state of California, but to the 15,000 people that live here and would like to continue having a water source, it's a high priority. I would suggest that somehow, if we're also considered critical under Sigma, that maybe we need to have a parentheses that says, if you want to keep up this low priority issue, perhaps in parentheses, it should say considered critical under Sigma, to clarify. It's very confusing that you can't in one breath say it's a low priority and the next breath say that it's critical or even higher. And as the drought continues and we're not going to get any rainfall for the rest of the month, and that pretty much means for the rest of the summer, we won't see a drop of rain. We're not refilling our basin anywhere. There's nothing coming in. So we're just getting more critical as time goes on. I wanted to just clarify with Bruce, a prior statement. He said, is the library well upper aquifer or lower aquifer? It's upper, isn't it? And that's a question that I also think has never been brought up, is the upper aquifer is very overflowing, and though polluted, it has some use for offsetting, even the ag could be offsetting. And I know the basin is different on the east side. But I'm throwing that out as another thing to look at, because we need to stop taking water out of the basin. It's even a 2-year-old could figure that one out. And I think Jeff is right that saltwater intrusion is the beginning of all overdraft status. And we've been saltwater intruded for, 40 years since the county decided that it wasn't a problem. I also still think the earlier suggestion that we could get the public something easier to understand would be going back to looking at getting the minutes written out. I know that's a dead horse, but it's still, if you want the community involved, which, I would hope you would, that's the only way they're going to figure this out, because it's way too complicated to sit here and see the terms flying around with absolutely no idea if they just walked into a meeting. I think that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lindy. With that, then we'll go ahead and close public comment. Daniel, would you like to respond to some of these comments? And then Bruce, I don't know if you need to respond to that question. Okay. Up. Daniel?
Yeah, there was a question about the water offset study and the timing of that. And I believe that the timing that we heard from county planning was that it would be extending out into later this summer, and that would potentially align with ongoing communications with county planning and coastal commission and hopefully the BMC. So
I'm sorry, what was going to extend out over the summer?
the water offset study schedule for
okay.
that study was
Right.
going to extend.
No, I'm not sure. It took us a while to get the consultant on board, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure of the details of the schedule on that.
But yeah, no, ideally that those initiatives will align in time, because I think the BMC has expressed and that water offset study is going to be very informative to the BMC and the community, both in understanding what is the remaining water conservation potential, but also in what is the potential additional demand that the community plan, if approved, would put on basin water supplies. So the study is going to really help inform us in both of those arenas, and that's obviously a critical pieces of information for the BMC moving forward. I think those were the main questions. The rest, I think, was quite a few stuff related to comments.
Well, we'll take those comments into account and then we'll bring them back next meeting. Anybody have anything else at this point? There, we can move on to the big item on the agenda here. Okay, so with that, then we'll move on to the action items, which are number 9, the action items. The first one is the presentation of the draft 2021 Basin Management Committee Annual Monitoring Report. And this is a draft for comments. So that's the purpose of today's meeting, is to go ahead and find out what additions, changes, corrections, deletions need to be made into the report. So Daniel, well, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Marshall. So yes, this item is to present some summary elements of the draft 2021 BMC annual monitoring report. The draft annual monitoring report was released on May 6th for public review and comment, and comments are due today, actually, on the public draft, and we'll also receive comments here at the meeting today. Then staff from the BMC and the parties will take all those comments into consideration and develop a final draft annual monitoring report that will bring back to the BMC for consideration for approval at anticipated our currently scheduled meeting in June, or June 15th. The presentation that I've provided you today is a presentation of some of the key findings from the annual monitoring report. I probably will try to go through this relatively quickly, just given that, or at least some of these slides, because these are slides that we presented at the last BMC meeting, our sneak peek of the annual monitoring report. But feel free to ask questions if there's anything that I browsed through too quickly. Okay, so beginning with rainfall. Rainfall is obviously one of the key parameters that impacts basin sustainable yield. And so in water year 2021, the Los Osos landfill rainfall gauge received 14.16 inches of rainfall. Average rainfall at that gauge is 15.99 inches. So unfortunately, a below average rainfall year. The graphs that I'm showing you here are actually for the Morro Bay Fire Department rainfall gauge. The reason for that is this is the rainfall, the rain gauge that has the longest period of record, whereas the Los Osos landfill only has about 16 years of data. So what we're seeing on the top is the cumulative departure from mean rainfall. So areas when that graph is going down, it means that we're having below average rainfall year over year. Areas when that graph is going up, we're having above average rainfall, as you can see in the late 90s when we had those El Nino years, rapid increases in that. Unfortunately, if you look, from really about 2005 was really the peak. We have been on a downward trend or seeing on average below average rainfall over that last 15 years, with only a couple of wet years thrown in there. And that is additionally shown on the graph at the bottom too, with the green line representing average rainfall, and then the blue columns, the rainfall totals for those years. So at the LOCAC event, Bruce said there's a lot of dense information. I commented at the event, there were lots of graphs. So rich information, yes. So there are more graphs to come. This is the production overview. We have the table on the left is a breakdown of the purveyor production with LOCSD, Golden State, and S&T's production for 2021 on the bottom line, the total production of about 1,026 acre feet. And then the table on the right is the production estimates for the rest of the basin. So the purveyors, the domestic, the community facilities, and then agricultural production. Well, total estimated production for calendar year 2021 was 2,000 acre feet. It's a nice round number, which I like because it's easy to remember. Rough numbers, 2,000 acre feet of production estimated for the Los Osos Basin. The purveyors accounting for approximately half of that, or just a little bit over half of that. And then other pumpers accounting for the rest. Other things to point out here is that, you know, production is declining, both from the purveyors and predominantly associated with reductions in purveyor pumping going back to 2013. Production's decreased over 400 acre feet, both at the purveyors, and then also we see that translate to the total production in the basin. And so another important point here is that, you know, going back into the late 80s and early 90s, groundwater production in the Los Osos Basin was over 3,000 acre feet per year, approaching 3,500 acre feet per year. And so really just demonstrating the significant conservation efforts that have been implemented by the community and help, you know, get us to the much better water supply situation than we are today, than we were in 20, 30 years ago. This table is an overview of recycled water use in 2021. The column on the right shows how the recycled water was used within the basin. The majority of that water was delivered to the Broderson leach field, a little bit to the Bay Ridge leach field, and then water delivered to Sea Pines Golf Course, and some small amounts for agricultural users and construction water. The column on the left is provided as reference to show how water was planned to be delivered within the basin plan. And the real big takeaway, if you look at the totals at the bottom, is that we have significantly less recycled water available and delivered than we had anticipated during the development of the basin plan. And this is largely because of those conservation efforts that I mentioned previously. We just have less water going to the sewer system and going to the water reclamation system and coming back. We're meeting our targets, you know, at least in this year and last year for Broderson leach field. So that's good. We're building the mound at Broderson, and we'll see how those benefits can be realized as we move forward. This is a overview of the metrics, and I'll probably just skip past this because I've got individual slides for each of the metrics on the follow, but I don't have a slide for the basin yield metric, so we'll cover that one here. So basin yield metric, we have a goal of 80 or 20% of the sustainable yield, as was discussed earlier. The calculated value for 2021 was 72. This is an improvement from the calendar year 2020. However, asterisk, if you see on the bottom, that in October 27th of 2021, the BMC considered and adopted a revised methodology for estimating the sustainable yield for calendar year 2022. And if we applied that sustainable yield to the 2021 basin yield metric, we'd get a value of 84. which would be above our target, meaning that there's still additional work to do to get to reach the basin yield metric target of 80. And that work is either additional conservation to reduce demand, or B, implementation of basin plan programs to increase the sustainable yield, or C, and C, which is allowing the Broderson Mound to further develop and better provide protection against seawater intrusion. The water level and chloride metrics are shown on this graph. Chloride metric is shown in red, water level is shown in blue. Both metrics, if you look at the last data point, showed a slight, well, it's never that simple, is it? So if you look at the last water level data point, we show an increase. So the water levels increased within the metric from the last year. That's an improvement. If you look at the chloride metric, you have to look at the last two data points because we're showing spring and fall chloride data points here. It also is exhibiting an improvement, meaning that the fall chloride metric is decreased from the fall for 2021 is decreased from the fall chloride metric of 2020. So both metrics showing a small improvement in 2021. Still have a ways to go to meet their targets shown by those solid lines at 8 feet and at 100 milligrams per liter for chloride. But that was anticipated, as we show on this graph, which was an estimate of how long it would take to reach these targets. It was envisioned in the basin plan that developing the Broderson Mound was going to take time. And with that development, once that mound was developed, then we would begin to see the marked improvement in the chloride metric. And that's what's exhibited here on this graph. So we're tracking a little behind these targets, and well, I guess it depends. Their chloride, in essence, you could say is ahead of its schedule, and water levels a little bit behind. Next metric is the nitrate metric. This is a really, a nitrate metric for the upper aquifer. I should be more specific first water. But what we're seeing is a decline in nitrate concentrations in the wells that make up the nitrate metric. And so we're seeing both a annual, the values for this year are down, and we're also seeing a reduction in the 5-year running average for the nitrate metric, both indicating a positive direction for the nitrate metric in the first water or upper aquifer. This is a table of the change in storage from 2021 to 2020. What we see here is a reduction in the total storage of fresh water in the basin of 100 acre feet per year. We saw it's actually, and it's a combination of changes in above sea level and below sea level. Or no, sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's a combination of changes in the amount of fresh water in the aquifer in the eastern versus the western portions of the basin. We saw an improvement in the western portions, a reduction in the eastern portions. However, those reductions and improvements could potentially be associated with the wellhead surveys that were completed and the change in the reference point elevations that we achieved or completed in 2021 that weren't as part of the data set for 2020. Either way, it's not a significant change in the number. We're talking about 100 acre feet relative to a total estimate of 124,000 acre feet of fresh water within the basin, but a decrease nonetheless. This is a figure that shows the current estimates of the 250 milligram per liter chloride isopleth, or basically what we characterize as the seawater intrusion front within the basin over the last couple of years, both within zone D and E. So these lines represent that seawater intrusion front. The green line shown here represents the estimated location of that front in 2019. In 2020, we saw advancement, or we estimated advancement of seawater intrusion as represented by the blue line. And then in 2021, we see a potential retraction of that seawater intrusion front based on the available data we have as represented by the purple line. Then those lines represent zone D, and then zone E, we have further seawater intrusion characterized by the red line on this figure. And one thing of note, it's not brand new this year, but we are seeing chloride levels above 250. We saw it last year. We saw it again this year at the Pasadena well. That's a zone E well located in the northern portion of the, well, up by Santa Isabel Street in what they call northern Baywood, I guess. Other metric we have is the upper aquifer water level, well, profile. And this is just, we want to make sure that we have water levels in the upper aquifer sufficient to prevent seawater intrusion. Those water levels are represented by that blue line. The protective elevation is represented by the red line. This is good news. The blue line is above the red line, indicating protective water levels in the upper aquifer. And moving on to projects. So we have updates here on the implementation of the basin plan projects. Just wanted to highlight two projects here. I actually already covered these in the executive director's report with even some updated information, but the upper 8th Street well hopefully will be online here soon. And that is anticipated to be beneficial. It'll allow the CSD to reduce production in the lower 8th Street well, and hopefully help with that and seawater intrusion potentially encroaching at the Pasadena well. Oop, wrong way. And then an update on the LOCSD program C well number 2, as I provided earlier, as the CSD has bids in, and hopefully we'll be able to move that project forward for drilling later this year. Just want to quickly run through some of the recommendations from the previous annual reports, as well as what's included in this report. Couple of things got completed in 2021. One was retaining a licensed surveyor to perform all the remaining prioritized wellhead surveys, as well as installing transducers to track development of the Broderson Mound. A couple of initiatives are ongoing, including reevaluation of the metrics, development of a rating curve for the Los Osos Creek stream gauge, evaluations of opportunities to improve the lower aquifer zone E monitoring network, as well as identifying potential feasible sites for a new monitoring well. All of those items are in progress. Recommendations included in the 2021 annual report include upgrading the steady state model to a transient model, as well as updating the sustainable yield estimates to account for reevaluate the sustainable yield estimates for the 2nd and 3rd program C wells, and revised recycled water availability estimates, all of which are currently underway. And this is just some other key initiatives that we're currently working on. A little bit of overlap here, but the lower aquifer monitoring evaluation, the updated metric evaluation. S&T Mutual continues to lead an initiative to look at lower aquifer nitrate contamination. The county is leading an initiative evaluating water conservation potential and water offsets. As mentioned earlier, we're trying to lock down the final funding piece for the transient groundwater model, and then discussion and recommendations about criteria for future growth is something that's ongoing and is a later agenda item. And covered this a little bit at the beginning, but we're here on May 18th receiving comments on the draft annual report. We'll bring back a final draft for the BMC's consideration for approval at June 15th, and with the intent to submit the annual report to the court by June 30th. And that concludes my presentation on the public draft annual monitoring report.
Okay, do we have any questions of the board? Mark?
Yeah, I just have one question regarding the rain and using Morro Bay. We heard in public comment about a discrepancy of a private rain gauge. And I just wonder if there was a difference between Los Osos. You said Los Osos only has 16 years. Have you compared those 16 years with the Morro Bay 16 years, and are they relatively accurate, close to each other? Or have we not ever looked at that?
Yeah, so we looked at that pretty extensively in the update to the sustainable yield. And yes, we have enough data to, we have those 16 years of overlap. And so there's a correlation that's been applied. Los Osos, based on that analysis, gets more rainfall than the Morro Bay rain gauge. And so that correlation has been then applied to the Morro Bay rain gauge data, which has a longer history. And that's been used to calculate, the average rainfall estimate that went into the sustainable yield estimate. But yeah, it's something that has been looked at and will continue to be evaluated.
Okay. And then my other comment is just some of the comments that were presented and received. And, I don't know if we, need to look at every comment as far as some of the context that the comments are framed around, but I would like to have Spencer look at the data. If there's data that's being pointed out as, I think there's a few numbers out there, I think it would be important to have Spencer confirm the data. It's just so important. So many decisions are being made off of this and report. And if there's inaccuracies out there, we need to make sure we clear them up.
Could I ask what data? I mean,
so I was
what are we
referring to
talking
some of the public comments. I don't have them, but
Yeah.
they pointed out specific numbers.
but are these measurements?
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
we got a long letter from the
yeah, I
sustainability
saw
group.
that.
Yeah.
Just saw that. Yeah. No, I guess it's something that might be usefully discussed in the annual report as a bit, maybe it's an appendix in the background, is the nature of what models do and how it is that they're established and how it is that they're calibrated and what their function is. Because I think there's a considerable misconception about what any modeling of basin response to extraction or rainfall is. And it's not an arbitrary calculation. It's been carefully calibrated and is evaluated on an ongoing basis to make sure that it is providing us the right management information. We're talking about moving to a more sophisticated kind of modeling with the transient model. And I think that might provide the opportunity to speak to exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish, what role that model plays. It's a fundamental, you often hear, well, it's just a model. Well, what it is a calculation of the physical response of a system to the inputs and the the inputs and the extractions. And so I didn't mean to be challenging in my question. It's more a matter of being refined in our interrogation of what it is we're trying to solidify.
And I appreciate that comment. And that's why I was trying to point out in the context of what those questions are. But I think there was simple data questions about imposing numbers and those kind of things that's what I was trying to clarify. Because I understand what you're clarifying there. And that's why I made that comment about the context of it. And then it was a separate comment besides that, it was separate than the rain gauge comment. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I can just respond that, yeah, we will be going through the comments and preparing responses, addressing and or clarifying, where there may have been discrepancies or perceived discrepancies, and we've already started that process, and we'll bring that back to the BMC for their review.
And I, just to further clarify, I don't think that we need to go through every single one of those responses in the way. I mean, I think we need to file and document them. And I do appreciate, the logs group taking the time to provide those comments, but it's more of the factual information that I think you should spend your time on, and not the interpretation of modeling and such that Supervisor Gibson just mentioned.
Okay, Charlie.
I just have comments to make after public comments, I think.
Okay,
And I hope we do go through all the public comments and we don't just file them. I hope that those are matter for public scrutiny, the public comments.
Yeah,
Some were submitted in writing.
yeah, and we've already started that process, and we can provide them as an attachment to the agenda packet for the final draft report. And so, yeah, we definitely will be doing that, reviewing all of them.
But here at this meeting, right, we're going to present the comments that were submitted in writing at this meeting.
I'm not prepared. Yeah, no, I would present them at the next meeting. But the comments that you have that you want to share, we can make those available.
If I could,
Okay.
the comments that were submitted in that long letter are part of the public record. So they're on the record. I expect Dan and staff to do the normal fine job of responding to those that are material to the questions regarding the plan that we're putting forth.
So by matter of public record, you mean they're discoverable under a freedom of information request?
They're part of the body of written information upon which we
but,
make our decision.
but Daniel's going to take those into account when they do their draft, and we'll be
Right.
able to have a discussion about some things that we think were overlooked or we don't agree with how they were interpreted at our next meeting. Okay, so we'll go to public comment, please.
If you'd like to make a public comment online, please raise your hand to the podium in person. And we've had a few questions, which I'm directing folks to ask in public comment. Okay.
If they don't ask them in public comment, we're not going to discuss them.
Right, exactly. McGibney, please unmute.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Dan. A nice presentation, but unfortunately Zooming, we were not able to see the graphs you were presenting. Maybe in the future, for a future meetings, you might address this. And just FYI to Mr. Gibson, the sustainability group does retain a certified hydrologist who reviews and comments on the AMRs and who does understand how models work and how metrics are arrived at. This year's AMR is very disappointing, and at a cost of almost $56,000, I am sorry to say it should be rejected as is. The sustainability group sent 10 pages of suggested improvements, but as is, the AMR gives a rosy picture, implying our water basin is improving in health, and if approved as is, it will report progress of our basin. There is no factual data supporting this. The incremental improvements reported in water rise, the drop in chlorides and nitrates are all questionable because of the data points used. LA10, that is double counted, is admittedly unreliable. There is no discussion on possible wellbore leakage or that all the data points may not have been the same as in other reports. One can't compare apples to figs and make determinations other than that they are different. After 7 years of management under adjudication, there are few of the anticipated improvements to our basin. Seawater intrusion is still a huge issue. Stopping it or reversing it is the #1 immediate goal of the basin plan. #2 is having a sustainable water supply for the current population. Instead, the focus is on what is referred to as continuous goals. One being, and I quote, to provide sustainable water supplies for future development within Los Osos, consistent with local land use planning policy, end of quote. How does this help the residents who are here now? How does this create a sustainable water supply for them? In the AMR tables, H4 and 5 claim 23.12 inches of precipitation in 2021. And it also says in 2021, 18 inches out of the 23 inches of annual rainfall came in either January or December. In January through December of 2021, we received less than 18 inches. And you do not calculate rainfall by the calendar year. You do it by the rain season, which runs from July 1st through June 30th of the following year. Calculating it that way, the rain season ended in June in 2021. In our professional rain gauge, which we have, we received less than 11 inches. And Dan, you say the most up-to-date rain information is being used, but what you don't say is that that information represents historical data in.
Sorry, your time was up. We're moving on to the next public comment with Becky McFarland. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, I do have some questions. There was talk about the mound of water that is building below the Broderson leach field. I live right below that mound and it does, so it interests me in more ways than one. I am wondering how the mound is helping against seawater intrusion when most of the seawater intrusion is in the lower basin. And I may be wrong, but the mound I think is above the upper aquifer and it's not going down very fast and it hasn't reached the lower basin yet. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And how long do you envision this to take to see some remedy? Because we've heard anywhere, oh, well, it should have been like 10 years. And then we hear, well, we're not going to see it till 30 years. Again, why are we putting any more straws into this aquifer? The nitrates and the chlorides are up in S&T wells. Charlie Cody made it very clear, and he was very passionate about that in another meeting I was at. Their wells are in trouble there. Those are the only wells they have. He asked about hooking into the new well. They don't have the infrastructure to get to the new well. And then to the maps, I love maps. I'm an educator and any kind of visuals that make it easier for the public to understand are great. The older seawater maps showed lines all the way back to 2005. And then before they switched to this latest looking one, it showed 1985 back at the sand spit. I think it's important to show where it has gone since 1985 till now. One question, I don't know if it's incorrect, but that fall line, the red line, it says 2012 on it. And I think that said that on last year's map too. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it would be nice to have the year printed right on the line. So when someone picks up that map, they look at it and go, oh, okay. And it could be like 2021 F for fall or 2021 S for spring, but that would be really helpful. And again, putting out something that is readable for the average citizen in our town would be really helpful. People look at this. I have some scientific background, so I can look and I research and try to figure this stuff out. The average person that we're trying to get to conserve water doesn't understand what this means. So please put out something that the average person can read. Even my, my young adult son, it would be great to hand something to him and say, look at this. You should know about your only water supply in this town. And again, thank you. And thank you for serving on this committee.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Emily Meggins, please unmute yourself.
There. So the other evening I was having a couple interesting conversations just with neighbors and friends in Los Osos, and I was surprised when someone told me that their neighbor had dug an illegal well. And I would love to know what our county does to do the intel on that kind of activity. Because I think, when we're in times of water scarcity, it's important to kind of tamp down on that. I have no idea how many of those could even exist. And a few years ago, my house painter actually told me that he had a well too, even though he's in the prohibition zone and not on septic anymore. And that kind of surprised me. So at that time, I didn't really think about it. But anyway, just wondering how that's managed. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
We have no more comments online.
Okay, thank you. Lindy?
Lindy Owen, I don't know if you want to go back through the graphs that you put up earlier, but I want to speak one by one on each of them. The rainfall issue needs to be addressed better. We are in climate change, and the rain that falls over Los Osos and Morro Bay is sporadic. It could be raining on one street and not raining on the next. So whether you want to update collection levels, monitoring by putting a variety of rain collectors in, this, going out to Morro Bays is just ridiculous. I will agree that I think we've got a lot less in many areas, and it also depends on where it goes in the ground. So the second graph is the the groundwater reduction by purveyors. Oh, wait. Anyway, the groundwater reduction, you say that by the purveyors is reduced, but ag is more. So obviously we have a little problem with agriculture not getting on the bandwagon with the rest of us who are paying for this. They don't pay a penny. And to Mr. Gibson's comment, we've known about saltwater intrusion and the problem with our aquifer for over 30 years. It's documented clear as a bell. The county chose not to take it on as an issue. They were much more interested in development by getting a sewer in. Brotherson is getting more water. That mound, again, we don't know what's in the lower aquifer. If it's salt water, I don't think that mound means beans, and we will have wasted an awful lot of our recycled water that we're paying to produce and send at the most expense all the way across town. Then I was going to the basin metric preview. You talk about how there's improvements. Well, I don't know what the improvement is from, say, basin yield metric 72. I want to know what it was in 2020. Then I can decide whether it's an improvement. Does that make sense? So I wish you could add a column to put the 2020 data there. I want to know what that I'm not going to go back and dig through records to find out if there truly is one. That would clarify. Chloride and water levels. Perhaps the chloride increase is water that makes the water also look a little bit higher or lower. So I thought we had more transducers going in for the Brotherson monitoring. We only have 3, but I thought that was supposed to be an increase. The monitoring near Cabrillo, the nitrate increase there is substantial and alarming. It could be reducing in other parts. So I would rather talk about where the highest nitrate readings are instead of making a mix of the lower and the high. Thanks.
Thank you, Lindy. Okay, with that, then we'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee for discussion. I would like to point out one thing before we get into discussion here. I want to thank the public for their comments and the written comments that we've gotten on the draft and the questions that were raised today. But I think most of these are not going to be addressed right now. They're going to be addressed in the revised draft that we've got. So that's the whole purpose of having today's meeting, is get those comments, and then over the next month they'll be integrated. And if we have questions about something that we were concerned about, we can address them with Daniel in the interim, or if they're not incorporated, we can bring them up before the final draft is approved. So I just wanted to make it clear that was the intent of where we're going today. Okay, with that, then I'll go to public comment, or not public comment, committee comment, pardon me.
I have pretty extensive comments. If somebody else would like to go first, but I can go if you'd like.
I've got one short.
There you go.
Figure 23, which is the water level and chloride metric graph. You showed the version that has the projected trajectory of that. I think that should be the figure that's in the annual report, because that speaks directly to progress toward the goal. This is the monitoring report after all. That is, again, the calculations that we have done as to what the effect of the changes of the basin management plan, the reality of the wastewater, recycled water. And so I think those projections are fundamentally important to interpreting the information we see there. I think in all instances, when we show these data, we need to show them against those projections.
What, Mark, you want to go? Okay, Charlie, go ahead.
Okay. I have a document that we submitted on our S&T review that might be, do you have it for?
Yeah, we can pull that up.
Okay. And I'll be talking from that document. I'd like to say, first of all, that this is difficult, not just for S&T, but we get this less than 30 days to review this 400-page document. And I realize that a lot of this is in the annual report is repeated from year to year. So we see a lot of the same things in the same locations every year. But we all have other full-time jobs and that kind of thing we're busy with. So it was a struggle. I'd like to thank Chris Gardner, who's a director at S&T, for helping out significantly this year on the review, and Beth Reinecke, who's a new consultant to S&T. She's also a shareholder with lots of water resource experience. So you can see in the revision matrix in the top of the document that we had several discussions about this just lately, including this morning. An earlier revision of this document was discussed with Dan Heimel and Spencer Harris. And that's kind of the nature of this. I think that a lot of these talks are done sort of in private to get refined, to get these questions and comments refined. And it was very helpful for us because this document became half the size after the review this morning with Daniel and Spencer. So starting out, this will be the last year that the BMC produces an annual report with this older methodology. And that's a relief. I think that'll be a relief to everyone. It's a little bit, I'm sure, confusing and perhaps maybe even disturbing for people to see the basin yield metric appearing to show that we're ready for development build out in Los Osos now, and that won't be the case with the next annual report. So one of the first item A is we're concerned that a unanimous vote of the BMC board to accept an annual report might be interpreted as an approval of changes in BMC policy that might be interspersed inside of these reports. And I know that got discussed specifically about acceptance of sustainable yield numbers in the past. And we decided that no, that wasn't. And in that specific case, that's obviously not acceptable because sustainable yield figure has to be accepted by a unanimous vote of the board in the year prior to the measurement year. So we know that that couldn't have happened in that case. But yes, this morning in the meeting, Dan tentatively agreed that he could request to add a statement in the next draft of the annual report in the executive summary area that indicates that a unanimous approval of the AR is not approving any change in BMC policy, that would be done separately as agenda items. And as item B.
Charlie, do you mind if I just clarify that?
No, go
one?
ahead.
Yeah, I guess what I propose in our discussion is to maybe be a little more specific than BMC policy and say that, unanimous approval of an annual report does not imply unanimous approval of a change in the sustainable yield or an adaptive management modification to the basin plan programs. Just calling out those specific items that are called out in the stipulated judgment that do require unanimous approval by the Basin Management Committee. Moving away from the policy seems like too broad of a term. I'd like to add some specificity to that statement just so that it's a little more clear.
It's just the stipulated judgment says that important BMC policies must be accepted by a unanimous vote of the board. It's
Okay,
easy to cure. We could just have one member not vote to approve the document if that's necessary.
and I haven't had a chance to review the stipulated judgments as our conversation. So if that is terminology from the stipulated judgment,
Yes,
then
it
maybe
is.
that's appropriate. But we'll look at that. But
Okay.
yeah, agree with the intent. There was some ambiguity about how previous sustainable yield estimates were approved. They were incorporated in the annual report. Those annual reports were approved unanimously. We are intending to modify those procedures that specifically to modifying the sustainable yield estimate is a separate item that goes to the BMC for.
There are other issues like things, projects suggested that could affect the budgets and things like that that are mentioned here. And I don't know if the chairman would like to maybe have me stop now and maybe discuss this point in the committee, but Bruce has it.
The only comment I was going to make, this is a monitoring report looking backwards at 2021. So any clarification as to the intent of why we're putting this document out would be fine. We're not setting policy. We're taking the decisions that have been made by the BMC. We're looking at the state of the basin. Really, it's the state of the basin report. And
there's a section for proposals for work going forward.
And that's, yeah, and those are just suggestions, and maybe the statement is that any of these suggestions don't become real until, approved in conformance with the stipulated judgment. I think that's clear, but I think good intent language about what this document is, and maybe I've read it, whatever it is, 4 times now, 5 times now, and it doesn't register with me, but it is simply the measurements of the state of the basin. And so any of this other, I think where you're headed, Charlie, is fine. I don't think it's hard to get there in terms of crafting the language.
I agree. Okay. Item B is and there is an acknowledgement after the table that Dan has put in, or Dan or Spencer has put in, that acknowledges that the figures used for sustainable yield were not arrived at by the methods mandated by the stipulated judgment. Something to those terms, the one that you have there now, probably is sufficient. And we look forward to the next annual report for 2022, which will have the new methodology and that everyone agreed on, that this board unanimously approved that change in policy in last October. And I just included that the statements from the stipulated judgment here that define requirement for unanimous approval. So part C here, we concentrated our study this year on really on the estimates for non-metered water production in the basin. And most of that comes in this report in as Appendix H. We talked about this extensively this morning, and the comments and suggestions have really been reduced since then. So our remaining comment is that we feel that a complete and rigorous presentation of the methods for estimating non-metered irrigation has not been sufficiently provided in Appendix H. And by sufficiently, we mean that sufficient in the sense that someone could read Appendix H and recreate those estimations. But all of the variables for the equation used are not provided, or links to where we can find those. So there have been a lot of comments by the members of the public also about this in the past, and this would clear things up. We don't assume anything's wrong with the work that's been done. I want to be clear about that, but reproducibility is transparency. And there've been a lot of comments about this in the past. I think that that could help us out a lot with our credibility in the organization. So Dan and Spencer agreed this morning that they would update Appendix H to provide in tabular form, perhaps, all of the variables used to perform those calculations so that at least the arithmetic can be checked and reasonable questions might be asked about the choice of those coefficients variables. And there's a trend here just underneath C1 that shows an interesting change over time in the estimation for agricultural groundwater production, for instance, and community water non-metered production, that they've decreased quite significantly over time. We're sure that that these measurements are probably correct, that these estimations are supportable, but they're very important for the work that we do, and we'd like to have that work supported by real verifiable and repeatable measurements. Part D, after spending so much time in Appendix H, we think that it probably ought to be renamed as a 2021 agricultural and community water use estimates. Item E, I noticed the same thing that some of the members of the public did, that in Appendix H, the value for annual rainfall that was used to create the estimates for agricultural and community water was 23.12 inches of water for the calendar year 2021. And while the basin model input is 17.3 inches, which we also have some issues with. We've dropped that from our review here, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And that is an interesting thing. One of the members of the community mentioned this. That 23.12 inches of water that's used, it's directly subtracted from the estimate of applied irrigation water. And so it does reduce the estimate for agricultural pumping and community pumping. But it's interesting to note that it's true that there's a dramatic difference between water year rainfall and calendar year rainfall. So the calendar year, from the Los Osos gauge, the water year rainfall for the year 2020 is approximately, it's on the order of 13 inches per year. But the calendar year, if you go from January to December in 2020, because of an interesting thing that happens in the rainfall time periods, the wet seasons, that was measured at a little bit more than, it was 22.74 inches when you go to that rain gauge data. So I'm just reiterating here that we're not in this scrutiny and our study, we're not saying that anything has gone wrong here. We just want to have the information there so that it can be checked by us and members of the public. We have in part F, we originally had quite a few pages here describing issues that we feel we have with the 17.3 inches per year rainfall that's used as an input to the basin model. After our discussion this morning with Executive Director Daniel and Spencer Harris, we've decided to withdraw those comments. And partly we feel we agree with that. In general, all of us at S&T and Basin staff agree that that's possibly a little bit too inflammatory for, or controversial for a discussion to be held now about this AR for 2021, and that we will agendize this for a discussion as we're going to talk about the sustainable yield figure and adopting perhaps a change in the sustainable yield figure for the next report in 2023 this year. So when we do that, we plan to bring this up again in more detail, a discussion about what might be more appropriate figure for inputting rainfall, annual rainfall quantities into the basin model. And that's it. And I'm sorry that took so long, but we were asked to review a document. That's not a complete review, but that represents the S&T review for this year.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay. Mark? Okay. So
Marshall, if you don't mind, that I'd like to provide some additional information just for the larger benefit. So the first one about rainfall data is, it's an interesting one. For calendar year 2021, we had a very wet January. And then, as you likely remember, I remember this December in 2021, we had a very wet December. So those 2 wet months fell in calendar year 2021, even though the rain season for 2020 and 2021 and 2022 did not, only captured one of those months. And so that's why there's what looks to be an abnormally high rainfall number. But it's just the timing of when that rainfall fell specifically within those years. And so it's just a unique anomaly, a relatively unique anomaly that occurred with this, the timing of the rainfall patterns over the last 2 wet seasons. However, the reason we're using calendar year data is because this is a calendar year report, and in the soil moisture budget calculation that's used to calculate the ag demand estimates, that is done on a calendar year timeframe, and so we have to use daily rainfall data for that calendar year. And so that's just the way, because we're reporting on an annual calendar year cycle, it doesn't match up with the other cycles, but there is strong justification. And really the only way you can do it is to use that calendar year period of rainfall to calculate your soil moisture budget for the calendar year.
Thanks, Dan. I think that things like this are really important to discuss in public. And I completely agree with what you just said. But having these discussions in private, this is much better to have these discussions in public so that members of the community can hear this also. And
I would agree with that as well. I did want to make a clarification. I think Director Cody you made a statement that the rainfall data was directly subtracted from the evapotranspiration data in calculating the ag demand estimates. And it's a little more nuanced than that. The rainfall data goes into the soil moisture budget calculation. And then there's a calculation for how long that water resides within the root zone before it percolates or is used for evapotranspiration. And so it's a very detailed calculation that accounts for how long that water is available and whether or not additional irrigation water would need to be provided to supplement a lack of natural rainfall to meet the evapotranspiration needs of the agriculture.
That's true. And I look forward to having all of the coefficients for that equation so that that can be reproduced by ordinary people.
The other thing I want to talk about is we're also going to look at potential opportunities to improve the ag demand estimates. Some of you may have heard about the availability of Landsat data. This is satellite imagery that collects data, that photographic and other imagery data, infrared, yes, thank you. Yes, remote sensing data that can be correlated to leaf cover, which is directly proportional to evapotranspiration or water demand by crops. And so this data is now publicly available. It's, as I said, it's collected on a weekly basis. It's collected for the Los Osos Basin. And I think there's an opportunity to improve the potentially the methodology for calculating ag demand through the incorporation of this new and innovative technology. And this is something that's being evaluated in numerous basins. And actually, I think it's being considered in some bases as an alternative to metering, just because of the high cost associated with retrofitting all the wells to include meters, when you could potentially have another very accurate and defensible approach to estimating ag demand. So that will be part of the conversation moving forward, I hope. And then there was a comment about bringing up the 17.3 inches as being inflammatory. I just want to say that it wasn't, the statements from staff were not that talking about that would be inflammatory. It's that this is a report, I think, as Director Gibson pointed out, on what occurred in calendar year 2021. So we're documenting the updated sustainable yield that occurred in calendar 2021. And so the appropriate venue for talking about the detailed assumptions that went into that calculation would be the next time we're evaluating the sustainable yield estimate, which will be later this year. And so it's just more of an issue of timing, not of content.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, with that, then I think you have a lot of comments and direction. So we'll move on to item number 9B, which is the permitted development in Los Osos. There's information regarding the the correspondence between the Coastal Commission and the county on the current process. So.
Yeah, no, thank you, Marshall. Yeah, let me introduce the item, and obviously we'll have discussion. So yeah, item 9B, permitted development in Los Osos. This item, the recommendation is to receive information regarding correspondences between the Coastal Commission and county planning and building departments on current permitting and approval processes for development, including remodels, addition, guest houses, and new development and ADUs in the Los Osos Basin, and to direct BMC staff to coordinate with county planning and Coastal Commission on the identified concerns, or provide alternate direction to staff. And so what's included in this staff report is really it's a summary of the two correspondences between the two land use authorities with jurisdiction over Los Osos. and or portions of Los Osos. Coastal Commission jurisdiction gets tricky, as we all know. But yeah, included in here is an April 19th, 2022 memo from Coastal Commission staff to county planning, expressing concerns about permitting of new development, as well as a April 29th memo produced by county planning, clarifying and affirming how it applies the current local coastal program when permitting development in the Los Osos Basin. These summaries included in the staff report are not intended as interpretation of the correspondences between the two land use authorities, but are really just provided as a synopsis of what, at least what I interpreted, were the main points of each communication to aid in the BMC's consideration of the stances provided by the two land use authorities. And I don't know that I necessarily need to review my summary of the two letters. There are a number of points involved, but I'm more than happy to do that. But we also have included the actual correspondences between the two agencies. And so at that, I'd probably defer it to the directors to see how they want to move forward with this, but would just clarify that and qualify that, BMC party staff is currently coordinating with county planning on these land use items. We have monthly meetings set up where we're discussing items such as the ADU ordinance, the community plan, the vacation rental ordinance, a number of these different sort of land use policy items. The water offset study, which is an important component of this. And so there really is ongoing coordination, but just wanted to bring this item to the BMC because, development decisions within Los Osos, can impact coastal water resources. And as the BMC, which is the entity responsible for the implementation of the basin plan and managing these water resources for the benefit of the community, it's important that the BMC stay informed of the development policies and potential impacts to water usage, and to provide input to the land use authorities on the sustainability of basin water supplies. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the directors.
Yeah, I don't think based on there's 8 pages total, I don't think that we need to have you go through a detailed synopsis of the two letters. The one was obviously from the Coastal Commission, predated that. Yeah. So, I mean, that one letter, which is responsive.
I'm not.
Well, I was going to go to public comment first, unless you want to go. I
Well-
was just pointing out that there's 2 letters here.
Yeah.
One from the Coastal Commission and then one from the county, Trevor Keith.
Right.
And that the Coastal Commission's preceded Trevor's.
Well, ours was a response to the Coastal
Right.
Commission's letters. And let me just, for framing, let me just indicate, Coastal Commission sent us a very similar letter as regards development issues within Cambria. It's a slightly different set of facts, and it's a slightly different set of disagreements that we have with the Coastal Commission, but it revolves around the local authority to administer the local coastal program.
Right.
And if you're not familiar with LCPs, local coastal programs, I can give a little tutorial. I won't now unless asked. But it is at heart, fundamentally a question of roles and responsibilities and respect for authorities that are vested with the commission, with the county, and with each of your water purveyors. And so let me just leave that as the frame. And if you have detailed questions, certainly can answer after public comment. Know that there are meetings scheduled next week to start discussions with coastal staff to explore the, how shall we say, differing perspectives that each of us have, and to get from coastal the specific documentation that they use to substantiate the findings that they have made in various instances. So this is one reason, as I indicated, when we took up the question of ADUs within Los Osos and Cambria at board yesterday, We did decide to continue to August. The date in August is the last date that we have available to us to act on a set of LCP amendments and suggestions from the Coastal Commission. So we're trying to provide the maximum amount of time to have productive discussion with coastal staff before we have to take some action.
Okay, so we'll go to public comment now, please.
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand online and come up to the podium in the boardroom. First is Emily Miggins. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, hi, just for the public record, I believe there's 3 letters that went back and forth, and Bruce, you might want to speak to that, which was the original CCC letter, and then Trevor Keith's with county planning response. And then there is the response to county planning's letter, which is from the Coastal Commission clarifying his statements and what could be considered illegal or not illegal, not just roles and responsibilities, but I'd be interested in a response in that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Linda
All right,
usually.
next, Jeff Edwards, please unmute yourself.
Thank you again. Good afternoon, Jeff Edwards. And it's quite coincidental. The letter that was sent to Cambria is basically a form letter, same one that was sent to Los Osos. At first blush, you would think that Coastal Commission staff really didn't understand the differences between the two communities and their relative water resources, but they understand. They're just plain dumb. They simply don't want to do the hard work that it would go into crafting a letter unique to each community. Clearly, this letter is overreaching, and in fact, it's a bluff, because the fact is they don't have jurisdiction over water resources. That's occupied by other agencies, including the water purveyors. They're trying to shoehorn in, as I mentioned earlier, with suggestions that there's not enough water for the existing population, and there are resulting impacts to wetlands and marshes, coastal streams, and adjacent riparian areas and marine habitats. Absolutely not. Talk about evidence, conclusive evidence. They have none that those impacts are occurring, and thus they have no jurisdiction. So, they don't believe, coastal staff doesn't believe in Title 19. They make a vague reference to that in a footnote on page 3. Every project, virtually every project for new development that the county approves is water neutral, period. And frankly, with the amendments to Title 19, I'm hopeful that even new bedrooms and minor additions have to retrofit to earn credits. So this letter, my suggestion to the Basin Management Committee, don't engage either as the BMC or individual purveyors. Let the county deal with this. Stay focused on your charge, which is very narrow. Again, remain focused. And, it's unfortunate that the Coastal Commission staff engages in this kind of bluffing and bullying, frankly. It's not new. They've done it many times before. But the ADU ordinance was another example how they like to bluff and bully with their proposed modifications. So again, in conclusion, don't engage the BMC, stay out of it. And as I mentioned, as individual purveyors, do not engage either. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Next, Becky McFarland, please unmute yourself.
Hello again. I would like to encourage the BMC to engage on the water issue with the CCC. It's very important that they do. The CCC is coming down on the county because they aren't taking the water issue seriously. And yes, I know about retrofits. It's being looked into to see if it can work better, but the salt water, seawater intrusion has been increasing over the years. It looks like it was kind of static for this year, but look at how far, what is it, 2 miles inland? It fluctuates back and forth. That's a problem. The elevation in the nitrates over in the S&T area is a concern. If the county's not going to take that seriously, yes, us citizens and the BMC, the water purveyors, should be engaging with the Coastal Commission, because hopefully they'll get the county to listen, which it doesn't seem like they are doing. And it's a shame, because the water purveyors did say that they're concerned or don't think we have a sustainable water supply for the current residents in our town. That, I don't think they were lying. In the draft one that I read, every single water purveyor signed that letter. One of them decided to go back on what he said on one of the ADU appeals. I don't know why. But I don't think BMC people, I don't think you're making it up. I don't think Cleith Harris is making up things that show seawater intrusion at chlorides and nitrates getting higher in areas. And as Charlie Cody had said before, you know, I think it was him, that we should be looking at the different areas of the aquifer and where the nitrates are rising and where they're not. So please don't disengage with the CCC. Don't leave it just to the county. You are water purveyors in this town. You are from the CSD for our town, our general manager for our town. So please stay engaged and actually get louder. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Patrick McGibney, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. And I totally agree with your last speaker, 100%. Very well presented. Unfortunately, the speaker before that, Mr. Edwards, is again ill-informed, as he usually is. The Coastal Commission has absolute jurisdiction over our water basin. It is a coastal resource. And in 1976, in the Coastal Act, they are required to protect coastal resources from degradation. And seawater intrusion is one of those. Nitrates is another one. Seawater intrusion is a definition of overdraft, and we are overdrafted. In discussions with Coastal Commission and with this staff, we talked about ADUs, guest houses, you know, the term significant increase in water was used. And my question about what does significant mean? If you're only talking about a gallon or two more for this, let's say guest house or something, would that be okay? And what about the next guest house? Is that okay? And what about the next and the next? And pretty soon that insignificant amount that you're thinking you're approving all of a sudden becomes significant. So in a basin that is in extreme overdraft, has a level 3 severity, how much more water can be safely taken out than already is? And the answer to that, of course, would be none. And that is why ADUs are not allowed with the Coastal Commission. Guest houses are under scrutiny. Build full single-family residences outside the moratorium area are also in question. And every one of those is going to be appealed until the Coastal Commission comes up to a determination, which hopefully in their communication with the county this next week or so, they will be having a determination on exactly what is and is not allowed as far as more building. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick.
That's it for public comment online.
All right, Lindy, do you have anything?
Of course. Lindy Owen, I want to pretty much present a sentiment that I think a lot of us who are concerned about our basin have, in that there is a huge conflict of interest between the county planning and building and the purveyors. And I mean, some of the purveyors are profit driven, but I really think that Golden State has our best interests over profit at this point. They've shown respect for the basin, but the community plan is a tool for growth. It is. It's all about growth. And I think our supervisor has supported water, paper water in the past, all based on modeling in order to add income to the county, because every house that is built brings in permit fees, sometimes up to $50,000 to $100,000 per house, and forever rent, tax income. It all comes back to the county. So that conflict of interest is like the elephant in the room often, but I don't think the county has had our best interests as existing homeowners in, you know, it's not been their main focus. I've watched it over and over and over. They now hide new growth in the ministerial section of the county listings. So it's very difficult to even see what new housing is being proposed. Recently, one was proposed with a swimming pool attached. Where anybody came up with an idea that that made sense to apply to put a swimming pool in a critical, you know, basin area. We have no imported water from anywhere. Let's remember that. And I think this Title 19 basically just means that the status quo never changes if it were correct. Of course, it's been incorrect for the whatever 8-10 years that we've been using it. It was proposed over 2 years ago to correct it, and the county has dragged its feet, and we're still not there having that correction and the updated information used so that we can apply it more reasonably. Retrofitting only means it's you keep the same. We need to reduce if we have any options to do so. That would mean not bringing in new development. When we do have enough water, it's all welcome, but it isn't here yet. So I just want to remind I don't like this aggression with the Coastal Commission. They're taking our concerns and listening to them, which they didn't in the past with the sewer. They did the county's bidding, and we ended up with a sewer that's not quite as efficient as we had hoped. But right now with the water issue, I think we're the ones that need to be listened to. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. Okay, with that, then we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the committee. So what would you like to do?
Let me offer some framing and then butt out of the conversation. So let me indicate that from my standpoint, and speaking on behalf of the county, my water purveyor colleagues on this committee are welcome to direct BMC staff in whatever way they choose as regards this issue. What I would like to point out are just a couple of things, and I spoke to the framework of it. I won't get into the details today, but in the framework, this really is a question of roles and responsibilities. Our LCP is written in such a way that if we receive a will serve letter, we have made the finding that there is adequate water to serve whatever particular development we have in front of us to consider. By the same token, if a water purveyor refuses a will serve letter, we will accept that as well. And that is respecting the authority that you as sovereign on your various water supplies, sovereign authorities on your water supplies have. What the Coastal Commission is asking here is for the county to override your authority to make a separate finding as to adequacy of water. And frankly, I don't think it appropriate for the county as an agency to override your determinations about your water supply. So that's one issue that we're going to discuss with them. To that end, I referenced that we're going to be having meetings with coastal staff starting next week. Once we get the framework of those discussions underway, we would like to engage each of you and also the water purveyor, the Community Services District in Cambria, on their set of issues to get your understanding and to come to an understanding so that you are on the same page as to what kind of development you feel you can sustain and what development you are willing to serve. It is in the end, service of water is your decision. I do think that some of the conclusions that the Coastal Commission has put forward, or some of the let me call them assertions in their letter to us, are not documented in fact. They have made a number of claims and they've provided no backup information. So that's yet another set of discussions that we want to have as to exactly, they have made findings of fact in denying certain projects, and to my eye, they are not well documented. So we're going to explore that. Finally, the Coastal Commission is apparently not accepting the county's retrofit to build ordinance now, whereas previously they had. You will recall that new development in over the Los Osos Basin outside the prohibition zone has been conditioned on a 2-to-1 retrofit, according to an analysis that was done back in 2009, I think it was, that justified the amount of retrofitting needed to justify the building of new development. That is crafted to provide net benefit to the basin when new construction is or new development is authorized. We are currently in a study that's been referenced today to verify how well that program works. And if there are adjustments to the amount of retrofitting and what kinds of retrofitting need to be done to get the 2-to-1 offset, we are more than willing to go there and do that. The ordinance in our Title 19 will stand that we believe that our LCP is constructed in such a way that makes that a perfectly defensible means of supplying water to new development. So as to the further response from the Coastal Commission, I'm not completely sure what Ms. Miggins was referring to. There was an email coming back on April 28th to our planning staff indicating they had received the response that's in the packet here, and they continue to disagree with certain of our positions. So all of that is expected, short of actually sitting down with them across the table and getting these issues discussed. So that said, I will certainly, if you choose to direct Mr. Heimel to make any particular response on this, I'm going to abstain on that motion.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Yeah, so regarding the can and will serve letter, let me just start with that. You know, the Coastal Commission made a statement that the will serve letters from a local supplier doesn't satisfy the requirements and finds it that it's the county's responsibility. And so we agree with that. I mean, we've made that statement before. What our can and will serve letter implies is that we have the pumping capacity, water storage, and facilities to provide water service to that customer. What we're relying on the county with their land use development or with their land use jurisdiction is that they ensure that those resources are adequate for the development they're improving. So I just want to make that clear. We've kind of made that statement before. And so that's my response to the statement regarding can and will serve letters. Overall, with this agenda item, you know, I think what we started out with is there is continued discussion from BMC staff and the county, the Coastal Commission. We've had direct questions from the Coastal Commission and we responded in written form. I think that's the appropriate way to handle. If there are specific questions that are coming before the BMC, then we respond to that. But to generally interject in a correspondence between the two agencies, I don't see how we fit into that today, right now. I definitely want to support and continue that conversation because I think it is very important that the BMC provide adequate input on water supplies, the basin. All of that information is out there today. I mean, we're providing an annual report that we just talked about, and that includes the condition of the basin. And then in addition to our additional information that we've put out there. So right now, I think that if we could, I don't know what the specific question is regarding staff's participation with both the Coastal Commission and county planning on this specific topic. But as I mentioned, there is dialogue and BMC is involved in that dialogue. I would suggest that we continue on with that. If there's any specific statements that come from either agency or both combined, that comes back to the board and we have an opportunity to collaboratively respond to that question.
Thank you, Mark. I agree with what you just said 100%. So Charlie.
Yes, I do too. And I think that was very useful, what you said about Golden State's philosophy about can and will serve. That clarification was interesting. I don't remember you talking about that before, but that was very good.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Dan for, sticking his neck out essentially and putting this on the agenda and creating that summary. It's a very nice summary that you made and should be really helpful for the community. And while we don't relish the thought of these two agencies going into an argument about this, it's an uncomfortable situation. It is important, and we are thinking that you guys it will be productive, even though difficult for the two agencies
Would
to
like to think so.
argue
yes.
about this.
Would like to think so.
One other thing I'd like to mention, Becky McFarland from during comments has twice mentioned the lower aquifer monitoring project as being an S&T project because S&T's water resources are being damaged. And while that's true, I just want to make a clarification and then allow the rest of the people on the board to decide if they agree with me or not. S&T is pursuing lower aquifer nitrate pollution project as a privately funded project. We consider that to be a benefit to the basin and the Basin Management Committee. The Basin Management Committee decided not to contribute funding to that project. The other point of clarification is that it's not just S&T water resources that are being damaged by this nitrate pollution. There's a Golden State water well involved, the Cabrillo well, and there's also several private wells in the area that are also being damaged by this nitrate pollution. So Becky, I appreciate you talking about this twice during comments at today's meeting. I just wanted to provide that clarification. Now we can see if anybody has a problem with what I just said here on the board.
I guess I would like to provide some clarification with respect to lower aquifer nitrate. The BMC staff brought to the BMC as part of the recommended budget for calendar year 2022 to include the investigation into lower aquifer nitrate contamination. In discussions with the director and with Director Cody, it became there was confusion and as desire to not have the BMC fund that, so it got pulled from the budget.
That's not the way I was preferring that it wasn't called an S&T project because the nitrate pollution is a basin-wide issue, and I just wanted it renamed. If you go back and look at the transcripts or the meeting discussions, I wanted the project to be funded. I just didn't want it to be named an S&T project.
Okay, this is not what
Yeah.
the item on the agenda
That's
here,
right.
so you guys can deal with that separately. So I think that, Bruce, if you're not going to get involved, I think that Mark made the comments about staying involved during the process, and then if there's something that the BMC needs to deal with, we'll deal with it. I agreed with it, you agreed with it. So I think we're good to go on this item. So unless there's any future comment or additional comments, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you. I'm attending the estuary program.